Welcome to the Calm Analytics channel. This is Boris Tizengausen with you. Today is May 21st. Here are the main news stories at this moment. First of all, I congratulate all Ukrainians on Vishuvanka Day. I went outside today. It's just so beautiful. Both children and adults are wearing Vishuvankas. What an amazing tradition. It's very beautiful. Congratulations to you, my dear Ukrainians. This one is my favorite, embroidered black on black. Let's continue with some good news. Ukrainian drones attacked the Syzran oil refinery in the Samara region. Local authorities have not reported any hits, but we have video footage. Let's take a look. Beautiful. This refinery is part of Rosneft's structure and is one of the largest refineries in the Volga region. Its processing capacity is 8.5 million tons of oil per year. Importantly, this plant produces not only gasoline and diesel fuel, but also aviation kerosene for the Russian army. And on this occasion, all mass events in Syzran have been cancelled until the end of the week due to drone strikes. This is according to the city administration. I'm wondering, what kind of festive events do you even have there in Syzran? I decided to look it up, and let me tell you what I found. The most famous festival in Syzran is the traditional holiday called Syzran Tomato. It is held annually and serves as the colorful culmination of the brass band festival Silver Pipes of the Volga region. They choose a Mr. Tomato and a Miss Tomato. So basically, the armed forces of Ukraine ruined the celebration. The Syzran aristocracy is simply in shock. Well, Mr. Tomato in Syzran, that's something else. By the way, I wouldn't be surprised if Medvedev took part in those contests at some point. He's so cocky, he must have those titles for sure. Laureate of the Syzran Award, Mr. Tomato 1989. That's why he's so bold. By the way, in yesterday's episode, I asked where Putin's fan and Baikal Lake Liquor, the Russian singer Shaman, had disappeared to. And now someone sent me a video of him recently before one of his concerts, crossing himself. Do you know what at? At his own portraits. Why don't you go ahead and take a look? Apparently, they've got some serious issues in the attic over there. Their minds have just collectively blown all the way past the horizon. And what will KGB agent Mikhailov, also known as Patriarch Kirill, say about this, about Shaman crossing himself at his own portraits? Well, he's got his own problems. Hungary will no longer block sanctions against Patriarch Kirill. That's today's news. They got rid of Orban's Trojan toad and things started moving. So get ready, Patriarch Kirill. Greetings from the European Union. Well, Shoigu made a statement. Look here, it seems someone gave him a dose of courage from Goodwin too. In short, Shoigu stated that the Armenian leadership has taken a number of unfriendly steps towards Russia, including regularly aligning itself with the European Union's position on international platforms. Wow, that's something. Nobody asked for your opinion out there in the swamps. To put it simply, Shoigu said that Armenia, do you know what Armenia's guilt is? It's that they have their own point of view, and it differs from the position of the leadership of the Russian Federation. And Armenia doesn't ask Russia for permission before making statements. So, according to Shoigu, another claim is that Armenia supposedly managed to preserve its sovereignty in the 1990s thanks to Russia. What benefactors they are, just look at that. I'll go even further. Soon we'll hear that planet Earth exists thanks to the Russian Federation. The stars, the galaxy, everything is thanks to Putin. Don't stop there in Russia with your idiotic statements. Let the whole world see this utter stupidity, aggressive ignorance, and pettiness. And here come the harsh sanctions right away in response to Armenia's position. Starting May 22nd, Russia is imposing restrictions on the import of flowers from Armenia. Now that's a blow. How will Armenia ever survive this? I wouldn't be surprised if Medvedev goes and does something nasty at the Armenian embassy's doorstep at night. And now Russia has decided once again to scare everyone with nuclear drills, but what they showed was a video of nuclear warheads being delivered to Belarus. They even showed a video, a whole minute and 54 seconds long, of an Iskander warhead being unloaded from a truck. Before that, for almost 2 minutes, it's being transported through the forest, covered with a tarp on some Ural truck. So that's what the video looks like. The Russian Ministry of Defense reported that nuclear munitions have been delivered to storage sites of a missile brigade in Belarus. This is happening, let me remind you, as part of joint exercises. Well, excuse me, but why did you deliver a nuclear munition there? Why did you drag that nuclear Iskander over there? I see here that back on August 1st, 2023, Lukashenko announced that Russian tactical nuclear weapons had already been brought into Belarus. So what were you transporting now? On April 25th, 2024, the expired Draniki declared that, and I quote, "several dozen Russian nuclear munitions are stationed in Belarus." So why did you drag a single warhead through the forest for the exercises, huh? Could it be that Lukashenko and Putin lied to everyone again back then, huh? They totally made it up. That just can't be. By the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. You can do it right now. It's important. And here we are fighting against Putin's propaganda. Let's do it together. And let me remind you, of course, that everyone who subscribes will have soft and silky hair. And now, a quick word about Putin's visit to China. There are a number of very interesting points there. I think everyone has already seen the video of how Putin shuffled over to his master, half bent, but even during the meetings, judging by the expression, I wanted to say face, but I don't even know what to call that Botox mask. In general, everything was clear from the expression on that mask. What kind of mummy went to China? Hello, Putin, what's wrong with you? Did you swallow a lemon or something? How's your mood, Botox jellyfish? Didn't really enjoy China, did you? Well, now let's go in order. Why didn't Putin enjoy it very much? At the meeting with Trump, let me remind you, Xi Jinping clearly repeated several times, as two superpowers, we must do this, that, and the other. In other words, the message was very simple. That's it. The world belongs to us, China and the United States. We are the two superpowers. We will be the ones to decide. There is simply no place left for Russia here. That era is over, as they say. Putin, in fact, never once said anything about being a superpower. Now, about the so-called very, very successful meeting, as Solovyov called it. A list of documents signed following the talks between Xi Jinping and the underground commander appeared on the Kremlin's website. Judging by this list, the visit was simply a failure. All they signed was some memorandums of understanding between various agencies and institutes, and some agreements in the field of media. 42 documents. It sounds impressive at first, but as soon as I actually read what these documents are about, a memorandum on environmental certificates, electricity, antitrust cooperation, urban planning, cinema, universities. What is all this anyway? Let me remind you, before meeting with Putin, Trump visited Beijing. As a result of the American visit, China committed to purchasing $17 billion worth of agricultural products from the US annually until 2028 and placed orders for 200 Boeing airplanes. At the same time, not a single document was signed. So, Putin has 42 documents, but they're about nothing. By the way, Putin once again failed to push power of Siberia too onto Xi Jinping. But why? Why would he need it? Well, the Baldy's aide Ushakov reported that the parties agreed on, and I quote, something very important in the energy sector. Wow. What is this very important something? Even bigger discounts on Russian oil and gas for China? What is it? China could easily force Russia to make peace, but they won't do it because China doesn't need that. The continuation of the war weakens Russia and increases its dependence on China. Why interrupt this unprecedented display of generosity? China's interest lies in taking possession of all these boundless Russian resources without any effort at all. The weaker Russia becomes, the more willingly Putin himself will serve up the resources of this vast country to China on a silver platter, even if necessary, below cost. So why waste nerves and effort? By the way, neither Russia's victory nor its defeat is beneficial to China. A Russian victory would strengthen Russia and lead to a decrease in its dependence, which is absolutely not in China's interest. Defeat would mean uncontrolled collapse, disintegration, loss of control, possibly a partial loss of control, and some of the new entities could fall under the influence of opponents. So China doesn't need that either. By the way, after this meeting, Putin's aide Ushakov also spoke about the existence of the spirit of Beijing and doubted whether the spirit of Anchorage ever existed at all. I get the impression that Putin is constantly communicating with some kind of spirits. Well, what else can you do if you've completely lost your marbles? And here's another piece of news. They finally got internet at the racetrack, and Lavrov came out with a very cynical statement. Russia does not want to inflict excessive damage on the territory occupied by the Russian army and remains open to negotiations on a Ukrainian settlement, Lavrov said. What a cynical bastard, right? I think they're all a bit unwell over there, or maybe even seriously unwell. Here's the full quote. The president of Russia has repeatedly said that we are not using the means we could use because we do not want to inflict excessive damage on territories where, by and large, our people live, Lavrov said. Let's take a look. This is what Chasiv Yar, Bakhmut, Avdiivka, Volnovakha, Popasna, Rubizhne, Severodonetsk, Lysychansk, Soledar, Mariinka look like, and in general many other settlements that have simply been wiped off the face of the earth. So this, according to Lavrov, means they don't want to inflict excessive damage. You know, I wish for Lavrov's house to be destroyed in exactly the same not too much way. Let me remind you once again of a recent comment from one of my subscribers that really stuck with me. It goes like this: my hometown of Bakhmut was completely destroyed by the Russians, but the Nazis during World War II did not destroy it. So draw your own conclusions. By the way, there's a very simple exercise to help even fans of the Russian world adjust their focus. Just look at Donetsk before the arrival of the Russian world. Open those photos, look at Donetsk in bloom, and then look at it now. Meanwhile, Ukraine continues to methodically destroy the occupiers and liberate its territories. This feat will go down in all the world's textbooks. In every episode, we have an important fundraiser for the defense forces of Ukraine. Today, we are continuing a major fundraiser for vehicles for the Active Operations Unit of the Main Intelligence Directorate of Ukraine, the FERRATA unit. These are specialists of the highest level. The unit specializes in the most complex tasks. In addition to its sabotage assault component and reconnaissance, Ferata also excels at the professional use of drones, including maritime drones. The fighters have recorded a video message for you. Please listen to it.
Підрозділ активних дій гурмо Ferrata дякую Борису Тізенгаузену та його підписникам за допомогу, яку ви надаєте Збройним силам, і просить вас про підтримку наших зборів на автомобілі. Автомобілі – це важливо на фронті, це евакуація, це логістична підтримка наших підрозділів, це підвоз БК, провізії та дронів нашим хлопцям, які стримують ворога на фронті. Просимо вас підтримати наші збори. Цінуємо вашу підтримку і допомогу. Слава Україні! Героям слава!
Let's help our fighters from the GUR. The link to donate is in the description of this video. There are Mono and PayPal options for those who want to help from abroad. And there's always a QR code in the corner for those watching on other channels. It also leads to the donation page. As always, my friends, I want to say a huge thank you from myself and from the hundreds of our warriors whom you have already helped. Together, we are a great force. Remember that. Now let's get back to Lukashenko. Russia is preparing additional attacks from the direction of Belarus towards the Bryansk region. This was stated by Volodymyr Zelensky. He held a meeting and wrote that they are working to strengthen our defense in this direction. Relevant instructions have been given to the military command, and preventive measures will also be taken regarding Belarus. The targeted directions are the northern regions of Ukraine, specifically the Chernihiv-Kyiv axis. At the same time, the threat is not limited to Ukraine itself. According to Zelensky, Russia is also considering plans for an operation against one of the NATO countries, specifically from the territory of Belarus. I think the most likely direction for provocations, I emphasize, is Lithuania, the Suwałki corridor. But here is an important caveat. There is currently no direct threat of a renewed invasion. This is about planning, not deployment. Lukashenko is lying low, simply avoiding this topic, pretending to be clueless. However, the gloomy tuber understands perfectly well that as soon as there is even a hint of anything, Ukraine will immediately put a stop to any attempt that could threaten us again from the territory of Belarus. So Lukashenko, together with his little Kolya, will have very little room. Meanwhile, Belarus has closed access to 19 forest areas near the borders with Ukraine, Poland, and Lithuania. The official explanation is that military exercises are taking place. Well, it's an attempt to show that they might be hiding something there. I think that in the era of satellite imagery and intelligence, they won't really be able to hide anything there. They will, however, try to simulate a threat. By the way, I think that Lukashenko is probably the least interested in these threats. He has only just started to establish alternative channels with the US, and even with neighbors like Poland and Latvia. So, in order to make sure that the sly root vegetable doesn't slip out of his orbit, Putin implicates him with these nuclear threats and possible provocations. However, no one is absolving Lukashenko of responsibility for allowing the Russians to attack Ukraine from his territory at the start of the full-scale invasion, like the lowest kind of rat. And then he went on telling stories about good neighborly relations, about how an attack was supposedly being prepared against Belarus. I think everyone remembers that. Enhanced security measures have been introduced in the northern regions of Ukraine. The Security Service of Ukraine and the defense forces are conducting large-scale counter-sabotage operations in the Chernihiv, Kyiv, Zhytomyr, Volyn, and Rivne regions. Well, as for news from Russia, it's always like this. In the Tomsk region, school children have been banned from wearing clothing with inscriptions in languages other than Russian. Just yesterday, I was saying that they were forbidden to dance to foreign Western music at their graduation parties. Now they've also been banned from wearing clothes with inscriptions not in Russian. And what kind of clothing has inscriptions in Russian anyway? I wonder what kind of brands are those anyway? In order to counteract the promotion of unlawful behavior and the radicalization of antisocial ideas, it is forbidden to wear clothing with inscriptions in foreign languages. Listen, does anyone actually wear Russian brands? Does anyone in the world even know about them? Yeah? In general, it's astonishing, just like in the Soviet Union, everything. Here they ban everything foreign. And I remembered how English was taught in the Soviet Union. Those who lived through it probably remember. We studied English for several years at school, but in the end, when talking to any foreigner, any native speaker, no one could string two words together. How was that even possible? From which grade did English start, the 5th or the 6th? Oh, I remember the textbook. There were these little red ones. They came in different colors. How could they have designed a program in such a way that after 6 years you ended up learning absolutely nothing? By the way, those ghouls who issue orders banning T-shirts with foreign inscriptions or forbidding people to dance to Sting or Whitney Houston, they grew up in a world where information physically existed on paper. That is, it could be confiscated, burned, or simply not printed at all. Their worldview was shaped in an era when control over the word meant control over reality. In other words, they genuinely believed that if you remove Latin letters from clothing, there will be less Latin script in people's minds, or, I don't know, that kids will stop watching some foreign music videos. But a Russian 6th grader has spent more hours on YouTube than the entire Soviet KGB probably spent watching foreign television combined. A Russian school student might know English not from the school curriculum at all. They learn it from video games, memes from TikTok. Putin doesn't use the internet. This is literally a documented fact. An old, out-of-touch man who makes decisions about the digital reality of 140 million Russians does not personally exist in that reality. It seems to me that no matter how much the Botox jellyfish bans foreign letters on clothing, Roblox, or whatever else, kids will still find a way around these bans, and that will be their form of protest against this out-of-touch old man and his aging KGB clique, who have long since been due for the graveyard. I also came across a very interesting report from the International Institute for Strategic Studies, stating that Russia is on the verge of a mobilization breakdown. It's a large piece, but here are just a few key points summarized. Russia has reached its production ceiling, meaning that defense factories are already operating at full capacity. Further injections of money no longer increase the output of shells and equipment, but simply drive up inflation. This is what is called an overheated economy. There are colossal losses, with Russians having departed from Russia. As a result, Russia is experiencing the most acute personnel shortage in its recent history. By the way, Russian officials are officially acknowledging this. But here is the paradox that makes the current war fundamentally different from the Soviet adventures in Afghanistan or Korea. In other words, Putin is waging war using market methods. There is no forced labor, there is not yet a ration card system, and there are no executions for desertion at the factories. Instead, there are huge, simply enormous bonuses, market-level salaries for contract soldiers, and insurance payouts to the families of the deceased. That is, the Kremlin is literally buying this war on the open market. The longer it goes on, the more expensive the commodity becomes, but the worse its quality. That is, among the new Russian recruits, there are more and more people with dependencies, chronic illnesses, and, to put it mildly, troubled social backgrounds. By the way, almost all the convicts have already been taken out of the prisons. In other words, the army is scraping deeper and deeper at the bottom of the social barrel. And since the end of 2025, something has happened that the Kremlin apparently was afraid of. What exactly were they afraid of? Losses in the war began to exceed the influx of new recruits. In other words, the funnel became bigger than the pipe. So from there, it's either reduce your objectives and enter negotiations, or switch to a true Soviet-style mobilization economy. Forced conscription, restrictions on leaving the country, tax pressure on the population, nationalization, digital surveillance, and blocking infrastructure to suppress protests. Some of this is already being used. And here is the most important observation from the report, which is probably worth remembering. The main threat to an authoritarian regime is not street protests, but a split among the elites. It was exactly this that preceded 1917, and exactly this that happened in 1991. It's no coincidence that Putin and his inner circle keep obsessively returning to these images. They remember very well which scenario is fatal for them. And the logic of this report is unambiguous. The war in its current form is extremely unstable for Putin. Either it ends or it changes Russia beyond recognition, and absolutely not in the direction that Putin envisioned for himself in February 2022. Just imagine, one day someone knocks Putin on the head with a snuff box, and it turns out that he was systematically and deliberately driving Russia into crippling dependence on China because he was an agent of the Celestial Empire. Why is he teaching his little Kabayevs or Kabayevas, whichever is correct, I don't know. Why is he teaching them Chinese? Peskov recently stated that his nanny is from China. The entire Russian elite is actively learning Chinese. I think that when it turns out that Putin really was an agent of the Celestial Empire, Russians will say, "Oh, how did we not notice? Everything pointed to it, everything," the Russians will say, and they will cry at the Ukrainian-Chinese border. And you, friends, take care of yourselves and your loved ones. Subscribe to this channel, don't forget. And let's help our fighters from the GUR unit FERRATA. The link to donate is in the description of this video. Have a peaceful day, everyone, and glory to Ukraine.